Hello and welcome to New England Authors. It's so good to have you here. We have Debbie Wiess with us today, Debra Wiess. Welcome on our program. You are
Hi.
the first playwright I've ever had on the show.
Oh, and I'm very honored to be the first.
And we saw your play just recently. It was staged at the Boston Athenaeum, and it was called Rosemary and Thyme. Tell us a little about that play.
Actually, of Thyme and Rosemary.
Of Thyme and Rosemary. Yes, I'm sorry. Yes, go ahead.
That's fine. And it was put on back in July at the Athenaeum in the trustees' room, and it's, I think, the third time I've put on a play at the Athenaeum. Twice for that play, and then I had a presentation of the precursor to that play, the first Proust and Joyce play, which is called Proust and Joyce and the Majestic, a full length, and this most recent play that you saw is of Thyme and Rosemary. It's, if you will, a sequel.
It's about Proust and Joyce meeting. There was an actual meeting that took place, but this was a meeting.
Well, I call this the second meeting, and in the course of the play we see under what circumstances they have gotten together for this second time. But they did really meet in May 18, 1922, Paris, at this dinner party at the Hotel Majestic. It was after the opening of a new Stravinsky ballet put on by the Ballet Russe, and they were at a dinner party to celebrate this opening. They were two of the 5 special guests, which also included Stravinsky, Diaghilev, and Picasso.
I see. And your first play has all 5 characters in it, right?
Yes, they're all in it. They are 5 of the 7 characters. So it's the 5 special guests at the dinner party, as well as the party host, Sydney and Violet Schiff.
Now you write both in English and in French, right?
That's right.
Your plays.
And that play is actually in both languages. I first wrote it in English, but then I put it into French. I guess when it was complete, then I put it into French.
And you've had your plays staged in Paris and in London and Toronto and all over the place, yeah?
My plays have been around, and I follow them whenever I can. Sometimes they go up and I'm not available to be there, but I like to try and be there. And it's always a great joy to see what one is created be presented and
so
in the world.
Now you spell this of Thyme and Rosemary. This is Thyme like Thyme.
Exactly.
But there is some allusion to Time, right?
Right. You were asking me about the origin of this name. It actually was originally of Time, Time, and memory.
Memory.
And this is Joycean for of Time and memories. The more of Thyme and Rosemary, and I kind of worked that idea of space into the play. It's kind of, Joyce was always enjoying playing with language, and particularly, I guess, from as he progressed in his career, he gets more and more creative and inventive and outlandish, one might say, and other adjectives as well, with his writing, ending with Finnegan's Wake. And so this is sort of getting into like Joycean speak.
Yes. So these two characters really seem to like each other. Were you concentrating on their personalities, on the philosophies of them? What were you concentrating on?
Well, I guess they are sort of frenemies. They have a little bit of a history, which comes up in the first play about their first meeting, in which things did not go off very well. And in that play, we see the possibilities of their encounter, and then we see the reality of it, and then like the denouement 6 months after that dinner party. So that's a full length in 3 parts. And this follow-up play of Thyme and Rosemary is a revisiting of much of what comes up and the possibilities that there were, because they finally have the conversation they were meant to have. They get together in a totally different place. Basically, it's residence, if you will, of Joyce,
Yes.
where he hangs his hat currently, and they are. It comes midstream in the conversation, and you see them discuss all sorts of things that they never had the opportunity to get into previously. But they also revisit their first meeting, and a lot of things come up, and that's where memory comes in. Time has passed since the first encounter, and we see, and that's part of the discussion about time and memory in the play, and also there's a difference of how they're remembering what happened before.
Yes, regarding time, Joyce says something on the subject of Einstein. He said, "I just was speaking to Einstein of his theories of space and time. It has been thought that I derived from him or he from me. It seems that we have a similar way of distorting time." That's very clever,
well, thank you. There's a lot of things in there by both authors, and I have to say that was actually said by Proust. That's one of Proust's lines.
That's Proust's line, yeah.
And what I did in writing that piece is I did a ton of research to really understand their personalities and the way they would express themselves, and get actual quotes from their work and other writings, letters and such, and what has been recorded by others about them. So I took all this and kind of spliced it together and created this conversation between the two of them using their own words pretty much, and kind of elaborating upon that and extrapolating upon it to create this dialogue, because it's fictitious, but it's factual in a way.
Why these two, shall we say, people that are a little bit different than the rest? Why is Proust and Joyce?
Oh, well, my interest in the two of them is sort of, I got involved in reading groups, a reading group for Joyce and a reading group for Proust. Actually, for Proust, there's actually two of them headquartered over at the Boston Athenaeum. One is a reading group reading passages, like 80 pages or so each month, and discussing it, going through the 7 volumes of the novel. And the other is selective studies or special topics about Proust's book and him and his times. So I got connected through 2 different friends to these 2 sorts of discussion groups, discussing these 2 authors, and in sort of boning up, preparing to join these groups, I was reading about the 2 authors, particularly Proust, because as of someone who's Francophone and Francophile, always intrigued about Proust, and never could get really into him before. And so I thought, it's about time that I did, and through this reading group, I accomplished the task, which is getting through Proust, and I was reading it in French. So I was intrigued by reading a book called Proust at the Majestic, and in the beginning of it, it talks about how they had this encounter during this dinner party, and it's just amazing to imagine. They were 2 of these 5 special guests, and they had an opportunity to meet, and it was totally just a blowout. It just a bomb. They didn't get on at all, except when they were talking about their various maladies and symptoms and etc. So they finally connected, and then they passed the night like talking about all of that.
So I want to read a couple of quotes. First, Proust says, "Only art is real and eternal. Only through art can time be defeated. All that remains at the end is art." And the second is by Andy Warhol, who says, "The thing is not to live forever, but to create art that will." And the third that you bring up is by Van Gogh, and it's even more pointed. "Art is long, life is short." Would you comment on all that?
I think that goes to the aspect of human beings have a finite time on this earth, and so they're hoping that their art will live on after them, and through it they'll have eternal recognition for their accomplishments. So I think it's the hope of all artists, whether they're writers or painters or whatever that their art is going to live on.
Yeah, so you're also talking a lot about memory, and I'm going to read a few more of these that are made by Proust, and I'd love for you to comment on some of them. Memory for me is a sort of incredible kaleidoscope of images of people, places, and things, seen and experienced, that whirl and reform in one's mind.
Well, that's one of the things that Proust actually said. Actually, all the quotes that you have there are things that he
I love
said.
These quotes.
And,
I love these sayings.
He had this wonderful image about kaleidoscopes, and so I put that in there. I also found something similar that, the word kaleidoscope wasn't used, but Joyce said something about how his memories, he's called it a tangled skein.
Yeah.
So it was kind of interesting, the different images that these two authors used in terms of memories, and I was unwinding these skeins that I found for the two authors and kind of creating my own fabric, if you will, bringing everything together and creating that play.
So then to continue on, it's funny how events of long ago can feel as if they were just yesterday, while others very recent seem such ancient history. Time does not treat us all kindly, accelerating or retarding its tempo. There are times you feel you remain the same while the world and others change around you. That's the trick of time and memory. With the fluidity of time, a day can seem like a lifetime, and a lifetime but a day. If we pass boldly into that other world, in the full glory of some passion, how much better than to fade and wither dismally with age.
Well, that final one is actually from Joyce's The Dead. And I make references to passages in both of their works. So Joyce's, I think mostly Ulysses and also The Dead come up, and then from as parts of the various novels of Proust. So they're pulling in these texts as well as other things that they wrote about to get their thoughts about their work, the world, their philosophy on their writing and life. And time and memory were aspects or ideas for them that were very important, and they were things that they discussed at length and they wrote about. They're integral to their work. And you could say that both of them had these great cycles where I'd say Ulysses and Finnegan's Wake are like these great cycles, as well as Proust's novel. They sort of, with Proust, he begins and he ends with time, for instance.
Yeah. So this is New England Authors. We're talking with Debbie Wiess, a playwright who's had her plays performed in many cities. Now, can I ask you, Joyce is a little bit difficult, right? I mean, I had to read in graduate school, we had to read a lot of Joyce, and Portrait of an Artist as a Young Man, that's pretty straightforward. But then you get down to Ulysses and Finnegan's Wake, it's very dense reading, right?
It gets more and more challenging as he's playing more and more with the language.
Yeah.
And particularly in Finnegan's Wake, he's got like 18 different languages in there. He was fluent, I believe, in 12, and then knew many others quite well, and then smatterings of yet others. So, and there's also some references in there, and he's really playing with things, going kind of backwards and forwards with words and expressions.
And he left Ireland, right?
Yes, his self-imposed exile, he called it. He went back on a couple of occasions, but the last one was in 1912, and after that, no more visits with family. Some of his family would be
But he wrote about Ireland.
He wrote exclusively about
Yeah.
Dublin. Everything is about Dublin, the people and places in the city that he knew. He said that being on the continent gave him the distance he needed to see it clearly, and that Dublin was representative of universal, life universally.
So is that exclusively why he left, to have Or did
that was just, I think, an outcome. But he felt that he was totally stifled in Ireland, and wasn't able to achieve what he needed to there. It's a very complicated story, hard to encapsulate, but yeah, he spent all of his life after 1904 in the continent, in Switzerland, in Italy, and in Paris.
Yeah. So, what about Proust now? He would. How would you describe his personality?
Oh well, he could be kind of difficult as well. They both had their, charm, but also their difficulties, and some find him actually as hard to read as like Finnegan's Wake is for others regarding Joyce.
Yeah, they're difficult. In fact, for that meeting that you allude to that occurred at the premiere of the Stravinsky performance, he arrived at the party at 2:00 in the morning, is that right?
Right, it was very early in the morning. He came out, Joyce arrived late. It was after dinner. He arrived during dessert. Around 12:30, and then like 2 hours later, Proust arrived, just kind of sauntered in. But Proust became very much nocturnal, and he would do his writing at night. He would sleep in during the day. It would take a lot of effort for him to get himself together.
Really?
That was towards the end of his life. It was like 6 months before he died. He died in November 1922. 6 months practically to the day after the night at the Majestic.
Oh, I see.
That's what comes up in the denouement, the third part of my first play about Proust and Joyce. Proust and Joyce at the Majestic.
Interesting. Okay, we're going to talk of beauty and cesspools, the particular and the universal. Please comment on what Joyce and Proust say about each of these. First, regarding beauty and cesspools, and some that I have abridged here. All right, so I'll read the Joyce part, you read the Proust part. Okay.
Okay.
Truth and this is Joyce speaking. Truth and beauty are akin. My feeling is the former is beheld by the intellect and the latter by the imagination. What interests me most is getting down to the residuum of the truth about life instead of puffing it up with romanticism.
And then I'm Proust. If one writes about life and society, one must include both the base and the sublime.
Joyce, do you otherwise believe To do otherwise would be like paving over a cesspool. The gauge of civilization is its odor, which invariably percolates into its literature. Ulysses smells of Dublin of my day.
And then Proust says, that is what we try to put into our writing, describing what is experienced by all the senses, so that reading becomes a visceral idea. Art is a perpetual sacrifice of sentiment to truth, and the key to getting at the truth buried within each person in the process of discovering what is significant.
All right.
So you get a lot of their philosophy.
Yeah, you get a lot of their philosophy there. So you want to comment on this?
I think that's a great comment about cesspools, and it just shows that there's a lot of flavor in there, and they're trying to show the truth about the world in their writings. But for every author, it's the truth through their eyes and how they interpret what's going on around them. Of course, yeah. And what they're writing about. And then, okay, you continue with Proust. I'll be Joyce there. In the universal is contained the particular. It is in the details that there is specificity and universality. In the course of one man's entire life, my novel shows the vicissitudes and caprices of society and the interconnectedness of everything.
And Joyce says, everything is intertwined.
Intertwingled.
Intertwingled. Although Ulysses is 735 pages long, it would be just as possible to devote a whole library of books to describing one single minute of Bloom's life.
Right, and then I think Proust then says that he wrote practically a whole library of books to talk about the life of one person. So yeah, they both were pretty long-winded, one would say.
Yes.
But in different ways.
So Ulysses takes place one day.
Right, in one 24-hour period.
735 pages.
That's right, and
Yeah.
Proust has 3,000 pages, and he goes from the childhood to late middle age of a person.
Are they pretty well read today, Joyce and Proust?
I think that they both are, and they're translated in many languages, and they're read around the world. And I have to say that I've been to conferences about both men, and there's lots of interest in both.
Yeah.
So they're part of, the classics of our world, and noted and very iconic figures in literature.
So, Joyce, you talk about the Wandering Jew. Joyce states that Ulysses and the Wandering Jew are simply different versions of the same character. Could you comment on this and the connection to his own life and writing? Why does Joyce bring up the Wandering Jew?
Well, he found there to be a lot in common between the Irish and the Jews. I think he felt that both were denigrated and not fully respected. And he probably felt, I think personally, a bit of a wandering Jew. He was kind of wandering, going from one place to the other. He didn't really stay in a place too long. Mm-hmm. I think in 22 years he was in Paris. He moved 18 times in the one city. And then there was all the other years he was in Italy and Switzerland. He was always changing address for a variety of reasons.
Yeah.
So always constantly feeling displaced and away from his home. Mm-hmm. He was always very connected to Dublin. That was his home. That was a very dear place for him. And it must have been extremely difficult for him to have to live apart from it.
Mm. So there were a number of authors that both Joyce and Proust mentioned that they really have been inspired by. Could you name some of those?
I think it's Tolstoy, Dostoevsky, and Ibsen are mentioned in the play.
Yes.
As some of the greats. And I think, writers are great readers generally.
Right.
And it's invariably the ones that one really enjoys that kind of are inculcated in the person, and it comes out in the writing. So there's sometimes unintentionally and sometimes intentionally, there's like a wink or a nod to a favorite writer. But I mean, Ibsen is a writer. At the end of Ibsen's life, Joyce got in touch with him. He actually learned Norwegian so he could write to Ibsen.
Really?
And have this dialogue through letters with him.
It's one of his 12 languages.
That's right. So, he was a great linguist.
Yeah. So we're talking with Debra Wiess, a playwright, and we haven't talked about drama ever on this show before, but this is such a refreshing talk. Can you tell us a little about you? How did you become to write plays? When did you start, and how many have you written?
I haven't counted recently, but I have a number of plays that range anywhere from a minute to full length, like several hours. Most of them are like in the 10-15 minute range. There's lots of festivals for short pieces.
For short drama. Uh-huh.
So they really range a variety of subjects, tones, and some are historically based. I particularly am interested in literary and historical subjects, and so do a lot of research and in these projects. But they kind of run the gamut.
And what's your source of inspiration? Just every day in advance. You told us about you read Joyce and Proust, and that's how you got this play, Rosemary and Thyme.
I was intrigued by the fact that they had gotten together at this dinner party, and I thought, what an incongruous situation. And that's often my curiosity is piqued. I want to delve into it more, and then a play comes out. I think that that's very dramatic, and you know, and theatrical. So I want to you know, create some play to put it forth. And yeah, I should say that I got involved in theater kind of a very circuitous way. Maybe it's very Joycean and Proustian in a circuitous way. I backed into it. I was first screenwriting with some friends, creating, discussing the projects in French, and then putting all the thing that we developed into English.
I see.
And marketing it to Hollywood and so forth. So I got into theater as a means initially to promote or kickstart my career as a screenwriter. But then it all got turned around, and I found that I really enjoyed theater much more than screenwriting. Well, screenwriting is great, but it can be very frustrating. And I found theater to be more my cup of tea.
What are some of your other subjects?
Let's see, I've written about ancient Egypt.
Really?
And Egyptology, and that's actually something I put on at the Museum of Fine Arts. That's had an interesting history. It was put on radio, cable, and performed. And it's there's a DVD and a CD of it, and they're in different museum holdings.
That's great. That's wonderful.
So it was put on during Journey Up the Nile at the MFA during the February school break, when they have also the different programs that are thematic. So it was about ancient Egypt, and then my play was put on 10 times over the 5 days.
Excellent.
Twice a day, and it was the linchpin of the programming.
Oh, interesting. And I know you and I both share a love of opera too. Have you ever tried to write a libretto for an opera?
Well, it's a very interesting question. I haven't as of yet, but now that you bring it up, maybe I should look into it.
Yeah, I tried to actually, you know, but it's very hard because you really need a musician. So what's up for you next?
Well, I always have a lot of things that are in my my hopper, and I just recently finished a new draft of a full-length play called One More to Go, and that is slated to have a presentation in Paris in November. So if you find yourself over there, everyone is welcome to come on over. It'll have a stage reading in the 11th arrondissement.
Okay.
So that's the latest and greatest. I'll be working on some other things. I might have a potential commission project.
Well, we'll keep in touch. We're got to wrap up now. Poet and playwright Debbie Wiess, it was really nice to have you and to talk with you. This is New England Authors. We record here in Cambridge, Massachusetts, and broadcast on stations throughout New England. Reach us through your local station or on the Curiosity Foundation website. Remember, keep it local, watch locally.
Thank you for having me.
Oh, thank you.